So chapter 10 is full of wonderful things such as pests, diseases, animals, waspy things. So lots of different stuff going on with this chapter. So and I would just say it's chock full of a lot of data. I think it's all very important. And I think it's one of those things that you have to know it at the beginning. It's just good to be aware of, but remember, you have resources, you have people you can talk to, you can go look things up. So don't feel like you have to, I wouldn't say you'd have to memorize every single bit of this. Just know that there are important things around honeybees and pests and diseases. So this first little beautiful picture here is showing a screen board that has a heavy varroa mite drop, and I would say it has a very heavy varroa mite drop. So all these little particly things in there. There's a lot of varroa mites there. So, and you heard us allude to this a little bit in the previous chapter, talking about we want to treat hives for varroa mite before we go into winter. So we have some various pests that are troublesome to honeybees. And they include varroa mites, something called wax moths, ants, also wasps, yellow jackets, hornets, mice can be problematic, and then skunks, raccoons, badgers, and bears, and probably other little creatures of the forest potentially could be problematic. So lots of things that we probably wouldn't think about right off the bat as being problems for honeybees. So when you think about it, this poor honeybee, all it wants to do is gather nectar and pollen and make honey, and there's all these things out there in the world that are kind of troublesome to it. So the varroa mite, we're saying it a lot of times because it's really important for honeybees, and it's probably the single biggest thing. It is the most dangerous pest threatening the honeybee health right now, and it's something that you can easily detect, work on detecting and treating for hives. I think when I look at pictures of varroa mites, to me, they kind of remind me of ticks on humans. That's not exactly what they are, but you can see the red pointer, and I'm kind of hovering back and forth. There's a varroa mite. You see the arrow on this bee. There's one on this bee right here. There's another one down here. Here's a couple of varroa mites in a dish. The varroa mites do damage to honeybees and can cause this deformed wing. Sometimes it's deformed wing virus. There's another bee there with deformed wings. So obviously a bee needs to fly, right? It needs to fly to get honey and nectar. So if you deform their wings, you've just killed them. So this mite was originally found on the eastern hive bee of Asia. And that bee actually adapted to the mite, and they actually enjoyed a host parasitic relationship. So it didn't cause the bee population to dwindle because of that mite. But unfortunately, this mite transferred to honeybees in the US that did not have a defense to the parasite. And it actually has resulted in killing the majority of feral hives in the US of honeybees. So it is a serious thing. It is something we need to be aware of. My understanding in hearing people speak about varroa mite is the assumption is that all hives have varroa mite. You really would be very rare that you have a hive without it. And especially when you're buying packages in the spring, that's why one of the times we recommend you treating after you get your hive, after you get your package of bees, because it's likely they may already have some varroa mites in that package. So there's a couple things that we can do to test or to detect if you have varroa mites in the hive, and you know, you want to kind of figure out where you're at, if there's just a few, if there's quite a few. So two pieces to that. So there's the piece where you can do some testing to see how many mites you have in your hive, and then the second piece is what can you do about it? How can you treat your hive? So you know, and just a couple of other things just to keep in mind. This mite is actually detectable with the naked eye. So it's not like you need to have a microscope out in the field trying to look when you do these tests to see if you have mites. They're, you know, as you can see, that oval shape, they're about the size and shape of a small sesame seed, and they feed on both adult bees and brood. And this mite reproduces inside of the sealed brood cells, and that's why it's kind of hard to get rid of, because once it gets itself in that sealed brood cell, that's why we have to treat a couple of times, you know, a week apart, because you're kind of trying to catch the life cycle of the bee and kill that mite. So one method that some people use is to use what we call a sticky board. So this particular picture here is a picture of a sticky board with mites on it. And so if you have a screen bottom board, they usually come with, I have some that came with a piece of metal that slides in the bottom, or I have another set that came with like a kind of corrugated plasticky thing that slides in the bottom. So they should have something that can slide in there. And that method, it's just, you know, this thin sheet of plastic or metal, and there's a groove in there that you can slide them in. And so the method is simple. You just spray that board with some kind of a cooking spray. It makes it sticky. And then you just put it back in the slot in the hive, and then you leave it for 2 or 3 days. And then when you pull that board back out, you count how many mites have fallen onto the board. You might have to use a magnifying glass. And then you divide the total number of days the insert was left in to give you the number of mites per day. So that gives you kind of a general idea. It's not a very accurate method, but it is one way to get a general idea. Sometimes people will do a mite treatment, and they will put that board in to see how many mites drop down after they, you know, as they treat, to see if they had a lot of them taken care of. Another method is to use the sugar roll method, and that is a method where you are collecting some bees to check for mites. You're scooping up about 300 bees. I think that's the equivalent of about a half a cup of bees. You want to take them from the brood comb. You, of course, don't want to get a queen in that group of test subjects. And you can take like a canning jar, and you need a little bit of like an 8 mesh hardware cloth on the top. I mean, you put about a tablespoon of powdered confectioner sugar in the jar, and then you put the half cup of bees in there, about 300 bees, and you roll the bees gently around until they get fully coated with the sugar. And then you dump the sugar through the screen into something that's light colored, so you can see the mites. And the mites will fall through that screen. The theory is that the sugar will loosen the mites off of the bees, and then you can count the mites, and then you can release the bees back into the hive. That's not considered super accurate either, but if you're really concerned about bees being killed, that is another method you can use. Most folks use the alcohol wash method, and you can also do what's called an ether roll, and I believe those are both in your book also. I think the alcohol wash is the one that's considered more, a little bit more accurate. And again, you're going to fill a jar. You can do a jar or a plastic cup. Some people have made some nice little cups with screens that they do. It doesn't have to be anything high tech. About 2/3 full of alcohol. You can use windshield washer fluid or the starter fluid, which has ether. And you're going to put that half cup of bees, about 300 bees, into that jar and swish them around for about 30 seconds. And then you pour the contents through this sieve or screen, and that removes the bees and lets the mites fall through. And then you count the number of bees. So some people are a little worried. I mean, yes, you did have to kill the 300 bees, but it's much better than having an entire dead colony, you know, especially if you're like going, you know, doing it before winter to go in, you know, into spring. So, you know, it's up to you. I do know beekeepers that don't do this, they just treat. But if you want to try to get a gauge of how bad the mite problem is that you have, those are some various testing methods you can use. So then you kind of probably have the question of, well, how many mites is too many? So they say the threshold is if you have about a mite per 100 bees in the spring or 3 mites per 100 in the early fall, you know, you should be treating. Basically, if you find mites, you should be doing some kind of a treatment on your bees. Oh, I see. It's interesting. There's some notes here that are different than your book. So 3 mites per 100 bees or 9 mites per jar of about 300 bees. So yeah, if you only saw 1 or 2, you could probably say, I'll wait a while. But if you're seeing more than
it's fine.
yeah. So now, you know, so now you've decided to test them, you found mites. So now you have to make the choice of what you're going to do to decrease that mite population. And sometimes you hear people talk about, like, if you come to some club meetings, you may hear people say, oh my gosh, I have a mite bomb. You know, I've got this hive and it's just like so many mites, you know, I couldn't even count them, you know. And so those are like, yeah, you got to get on it and do something to treat those mites to make sure they don't kill the bees. So there's, in your book, kind of classified as hard chemical treatments, Apistan, Mite Away, 2, Sucroside, Apiguard, Checkmite. There's a lot of different ones that are listed in the book. Of note, mites have developed resistance to Apistan, so you wouldn't want to use that. And it is illegal to harvest honey if you're using Checkmite. So you really need to research what you're going to use and when you're going to apply it, and you really have to follow the directions. Then there's some soft chemicals that you can use, such as formic acid, thymol, sucrose octanate, says can be sprayed on bees and may also be used to treat tracheal mites. You can use eucalyptus oil or essential oil. And really the newest treatment for mites, which I think a lot of folks are trying to use, is oxalic acid vaporization. And that's this picture right here where the pointer is with the little vaporizer tool. These are fairly inexpensive to purchase. You have to hook them up to some source of power. Some people carry a battery with them. We sometimes just hook it to our tractor battery when we're out in the field and use it, you know, that way. And you put a measured amount of oxalic acid, wood bleach, in that little pan. There's a little measuring scoop, and you do 3 treatments a week apart, and that is so you're catching the bees at their different life cycle. you want to be able to allow the brood to hatch and the mites to be exposed early fall. You do one, and then a treatment when you're installing the package of bees. And you can just get away with one at that point because there's no brood that you're treating. You're just treating fresh package of bees. If you get a swarm or a split, the same, there's no brood, you just do one treatment to make sure they're not carrying, because if they've split from another hive, that's a mite bomb. You don't want to bring that into your little apiary and have mites everywhere. So, you know, oxalic acid vaporization seems to be kind of the way to go at the moment. Some people use it in oxalic acid in other formats. I personally haven't used those other things. I think they're pretty harsh chemicals and I'm a little concerned about using them. And you do have to be more careful about exposure to honey, especially if you're going to be harvesting the honey. So if you want to use those other things, really research and read the directions and follow them accurately. Some of them are, I believe, temperature sensitive too. Other methods that you can try using is using a screen bottom board, so there's more ventilation, making splits with no brood in it. And I'm going to have to ask Mary on this one. I wasn't sure what they're referring to. It says natural method drone comb.
Oh.
If Sherry or Mary have a comment.
I don't. Let me. Oh, there
Here
she
I go.
Okay.
I thought I unmuted myself, but I didn't. What they're talking about is you can get drone comb is a little larger than the worker bee comb, and you can get foundation that promotes the production of drones with a little bit bigger cell size promoted. And anyway, if you get the drones concentrated on a frame, and varroa mites tend to concentrate in drone larvae or drone comb, you know, the production of drones. And so if you get a frame of drones, you can then remove it, and once they're capped, remove it and freeze them and kill the drones and the varroa mites. And that's one method people have used to reduce varroa mite in a hive. I have never used it. I know it exists.
Okay.
But, the other thing is you need to be a little bit careful because there are certain times of the year when you need drones.
Yes.
So you don't want.
She went off again.
Does that help?
Yes.
You went off again. You turned your sound off. We missed it.
Well, I'm not turning my sound off. I don't know why this is going on and off.
You have a time limit. So that makes, okay, that makes much more sense. So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
because I have to admit, I don't know everything. And so I was going to ask about the drone comb because I wasn't exactly sure.
That's what it's about.
So it's, and I know that sometimes they even go as far as queen, you know, capturing the queen, putting it in a queen cage, and you're stopping that cycle of broods so that you can try to, you know, so if the mites don't have the brood to get into, then you're trying to stop that varroa mite cycle too. But I personally would have a very hard time. It's hard to capture a queen, I think, and not damage them. So
Yeah.
that's me.
Well, and that's one advantage of swarms, because you have broken the brood cycle when you catch a swarm. So
yeah,
those of us who love swarms.
Yeah, they're free. I mean, you have to work for them, but they're free. And also, yeah. Although I think the recommendation is you do treat once, just to treat them, but you don't have to do that 3 cycle for them. So.
No, and you have a better chance of getting rid of them all, you know, really reducing the mite population.
Yes.
Okay, I'm signing out again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I got a comment though. The whole thing with the battery and the hot iron and this chemical, you don't want to do it the first time by yourself. Because have your mentor come over, maybe COVID, you could stand back, but have somebody show you that stuff is, don't breathe it. But anyways, it's a little bit tricky. So, you know, there's a lot of steps to it.
Yeah, there are some good instructional videos. The Scientific Beekeeper is a good site, and he does this method, and you know, you can find some good instruction too. But yeah, you definitely don't want to heat up the wand and put the oxalic acid on it, because it will immediately vaporize, and you don't want that in your face. So but remember, oxalic acid is what's in spinach and rhubarb and lots of things that we eat. So it's not, I feel that out of all the things that we can use, I feel a little bit better about that one, because it is from I mean, there are things that we do ingest that have oxalic acid in them. I wish we didn't have to do any of this, but unfortunately varroa mites are here. So we do need to kind of address that.
May I ask another question, Marie?
Absolutely.
So you had mentioned some other more natural remedy type things, but I don't know if there's any further information in the booklet here.
They should be in your book. I believe they are. Sometimes people use some essential oils,
Yeah.
and some of the other chemicals, so you can use those to, yeah, I believe, I was just looking at your book information. Yeah, so they do mention them. Hop Guard, Mite Away, some of those, they have those, some of them have that thymol in them. So yeah, so there's a variety of things you can use. And you can use those mechanical methods, natural methods, about, you know, splits or using or getting a swarm, that kind of stuff, or the drone comb, now that we know how to do that. So.
Yeah, and I would, you know, if you want to do it natural ways, I would do the testing for mites. So you know how many you started with and if it helps, you know.
Right.
As opposed to me, who I'm just going to do it on a schedule, you know.
Yeah.
So.
That is a good, you know, to kind of approach it scientifically. If you want to go more natural route, I think that is a good recommendation to do the testing, because if your counts are increasing, even though you're trying to use something more natural, then you kind of have to maybe rethink what you might want to, what the next step would be. But yeah. So.
Oh, and then you got, well, Marie, varroa mite sucks the fat off the bees, not like their blood. That's why they're so bad, because they'll get on these healthy bees and they'll suck the fat out of them. So they are really, really bad. They're not sucking blood or like a tick, you know.
Yeah.
So you really don't want them.
Yeah.
Actually, they are disease vectors for some of the viruses.
Yes. Yes. They're just all around yucky and gross, and you don't want to have any more than you have to have on your hive. So, so the recommendation is definitely treat, and also test if you're so inclined. So, all right. Any other questions about varroa? Okay, moving on to wax moths. So wax moths, they're not anything that's going to attack a bee directly. It's this little larva guy up here. They feed on the comb, the pollen, the brood. If it's a healthy hive and somehow there's a wax moth, they'll take care of them. But where most of us, I have not actually seen this myself, but except when people have brought in things to look at. But usually you see the wax moth evidence on equipment that's been improperly stored, like frames improperly stored and not allowed to freeze. So if you get a frame like this in the spring, you can clean it off, or you can stick it in the hive and the bees will actually clean it out in the spring. So it's not like the end of the world, but so this is the larvae here. And then this picture on the left where the pointer is showing their cocoons and their caterpillar stage at the bottom here. And then this on the right is showing the webs, the cocoon webs. So if you store your frames in a heated place, you will probably have wax moths. If you let them freeze, you will not have them. So I just store whatever I'm not currently using in a hive in an outdoor shed in the wintertime. And that seems to take care of the problem for me. So ants. So ants can overtake a weak hive. So if you have a strong hive, so this again leads you all back to that same thing. The more you can do to keep your hive strong, which means keep that varroa mite count down, keep the hive strong, they can overcome some of these other things more easily. So if the hive is weak, the ants can overcome them. Again, as you're deciding your best position for your hive when you're first starting out to make your little apiary, be sure to look around and make sure there's no known ant nests in the area. Sometimes you can't predict that. If you do find you're having a lot of ants as a problem, you can use some natural defenses such as petroleum jelly on the base and the legs of your hive area. You can use wood ashes. You can try diatomaceous earth. This picture has wood ashes around it to try to keep them away from the hive. And this is a top bar hive, and this is a Langstroth here. So they're trying to keep the ants away. Sometimes people use cinnamon or red pepper around the hive. The thinking is that if the ant nest isn't well established, you're probably, and they haven't gotten into the hive, it might help, but otherwise it may not be as effective as you would hope it would be. Sometimes you have to just end up using an ant termite bait, such as fipronil buried inside of the ant nest to get rid of them. My experience has been, it's not uncommon to see a few ants. I see, if anything, in the spring when I'm putting the sugar water on to feed in the springtime, but they don't seem to stick around once I stop that feeding. And I've never seen a huge amount of them trying to get into the hive.
Yeah,
So,
me neither.
yeah. So I think, a few is not, you don't have to get in crisis, but if you're seeing a lot of them and you find an ant nest nearby, then that's when you need to think about what you're going to do for that. So
When I first started this, I was thinking I was going to move these in and out of the barn, right? So I made a frame like a stretcher, for them.
Oh yeah.
So what I did is you take and stick their legs in coffee cans, and then I poured some oil, old car oil, so they don't want to come up into that and then up the legs.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that this year again.
Good idea. All right. So another pest that we have to contend with in this part of the country are wasps, hornets, and yellow jackets. So these are, it's kind of difficult for people to differentiate between wasps, hornets, and yellow jackets. We kind of tend to think of them as troublemakers. And we don't really enjoy having them around, whether or not you have honeybees. They're all vespid wasps, and they all share certain physical and behavioral traits. So they tend to have the narrow, you see how they have very narrow, I got the pointer here, wings, and they fold longitudinally when at rest. Their larvae are actually reared on dead or living insect prey. Their nests are constructed of recycled wood fibers. And what's most fun about them is they can sting repeatedly. So it doesn't make them super popular. Usually only the queen overwinters, especially in colder climates. But all that being said, they actually are good pollinators. So they also are pollinators like honeybees are. And they also control agriculturally damaging insects. So they do have a benefit to gardeners. I think I would probably say that most beekeepers would agree that, and just homeowners in general, you kind of don't want them around your living space, but it's not like you're going to eradicate every wasp, hornet, yellow jacket, all the other things out there. You're just trying to keep them away from your honeybee hive because they can go in and actually kill a hive. So, you know, anything we can do to
And
keep
then tell them about the bald face.
well, it's coming up. It's coming up.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah, it's coming.
You know, this is my pet peeve.
Yeah, so it's coming, but yeah, so no worries. I got a picture and everything.
Oh, good, thank you.
So all that to say, and you know, it depends on the person because some beekeepers will say they're part of nature and they don't do a lot of setting traps and such, and others are like, yeah, I'm getting on that because I don't want a lot of them around. So paper wasps, which I think most of us around here see a lot of these kind of nests. They build their nest out of wood fiber. There's a lot of different kinds of them. They don't share the same aggressiveness as yellow jackets, but I would say I've still had them sting me. So they usually have these open umbrella kind of nests, and they're often found suspended from eaves on the outsides of buildings. The ones around our place seem to love to go all over inside the pump house that we have. So you just spring and summer have to constantly look up there and kind of knock down their nests. They're usually small, these nests, and they usually don't have over about 100 members at a time. Relatively non-aggressive, again, good pollinators, beneficial to gardeners. They can have multiple queens and can get competitive. So there's those. Then we have bald-faced hornets, and they're one of the two main vespid predators of honeybee colonies, along with yellow jackets. It's not actually a hornet, although it's called a bald-faced hornet. It's a yellow jacket. It's larger, and it has the white facial markings from which the name originates. So it's kind of hard to tell, but you got there's the white markings down here, and there's some white markings. When you see them, they're definitely, they don't have the yellow and black stripes that we kind of think of most of the time. And then this picture over here on the right is showing a queen and a worker bald-faced hornet. They are predators outside of the hive. This is a picture of a bald-faced hornet that is grabbing bees as they enter or leave the hive. They can also invade the hive en masse in the late summer, early fall, and they can kill a hive. Sometimes, depending on how you feed your bees, can draw more of these wasps, hornets, yellow jackets toward the hive because, you know, you've got sugar water there. So sometimes when you're feeding it, also it causes all these other sort of more predatory vespid predators to decide they want to come and enjoy some of that too. So that can happen. These bald-faced hornets, they gather wood fiber and sap to make their nesting. So here's some of their nests up here. You can see they're kind of more of that papery, massive enclosed nest. They can be usually seen hanging from tree branches or other sturdy perches. The inside of the nest has horizontal layers of paper cells for brood and can number in the thousands. So, sorry, I got dog barking there for a few minutes. So anyway, they are another pest that we have to deal with in this area of the world. We also have Western yellow jackets, and again, they have a bit of a distinctive look here. So yellow jackets and wasps, the other predator for honeybees, they build paper nests down in the ground, and they can be very large, and they are defensive and aggressive. I have heard folks talk about like putting in fence posts, digging fence posts, and inadvertently digging into a yellow jacket or wasp nest and having them all flying out and wanting to sting. So, you know, it's definitely something that can happen. So the photo on the left here is showing one honeybee at the entrance and a dead yellow jacket at the hive entrance. And then this one on the right is showing how the wasps or the yellow jackets are feeding on dead bees. So the yellow jackets can actually be a natural recycling agent for bees that are dead bees that are hauled out of the hive. That's fine. It can be beneficial, except later in the spring and summer, they're looking for a lot more protein. And so sometimes they'll even decide, oh, it's not enough to get the dead bees. I want to get down into the hive and actually, you know, just invade and kill the whole hive. And then this photo here on the top right is showing an entrance to a nest under a rock. And the nest is much larger than what you can see from the outside because it's well camouflaged. And if there's any disturbance near that nest, it causes a mass attack. And that is why when I lift up rocks on my property, I have gloves on and I use something to flip the rock over before I lift it up. Because I've had a few times where I was like, oh my, I just unleashed, you know, made some yellow jackets unhappy. So there are also some things we have to worry about. So prevention, or how do we handle all of these different hornets and wasps and yellow jackets? The suggestion is to trap queens in the early spring, so March-ish, and using an apple juice water 50-50 prep as a bait is something quite a few people in our group use for trapping. There are, you know, the things you can buy in the store for, you know, attractant. There are a lot of different recipes and ways and traps that people have devised and, you know, things. So, you know, there's lots of stuff out there if you want to try different things. I myself have tried the apple juice and water and found it to be quite effective. And in fact, because I am kind of frugal sometimes, I actually strain out all the dead wasp, hornets, or whatever I catch, and then I reuse that apple juice and water and just maybe add a little bit more to it. So I've even done that to try to attract them. The reason why we put the trap out, why we recommend putting that trap out in early spring, like March, just as soon as we start to get a little bit more warmer days, is because if we catch those queens, then every queen we catch, that means that's one less nest that's going to be made that year. So if you can trap those overwintering queens, you're gonna be a little bit ahead on hopefully the number of these wasps, hornets, etc. that you'll have out there. The bottom of the trap, section has canned food bait with fipronil, so that, and it's made, and in this case, they may have altered it somehow so that the wasp can get in and out. So if you want to use a bait, this particular bait, you want to use, this is a bait that you want them to take it back to their nest to feed to the young in order to destroy the whole nest. So there was some previous recommendations for bait, but the most recent, newest research is to use the active ingredient fipronil. So fipronil is in like ant bait, and it's the component, the ingredient that's in like the tick medication that the tick repellent that you put on dogs and cats, things like that. So the current research is to use 10 drops of fipronil and add that to 3 ounces mixed into Friskies ocean fish canned food, cat food. So you want specifically Friskies ocean fish, cat food. And then to 3 ounces of that, you're adding the 10 drops of the fipronil. And then you want that out where your yellow jackets, wasps can pick up that food and take it back to the nest. So you're not trying to attract them in and keep them there. You want them to take it away. Of course, because that is cat food, you want to make sure it's in a situation so if you have a cat, they're not getting into it and eating it because you've added the fipronil to it, or any other animal. But that's considered to be a fairly effective way to reduce nests that you have in your area. Any questions so far?
Marie, we're kind of hitting our 8 o'clock time.
I think I just have like a couple of slides left. So
Okay.
we'll rush through the last of these. We won't
Okay.
rush, but we'll, yeah. So then we have the Asian giant hornet. So that is this picture. And you've probably heard a lot about it on the news. They talk about it being the murder hornet. So the main thing about this is it was first seen, found in British Columbia, Canada, and then the northeast corner of Washington State in the fall of 2019. It is a significant threat to honeybees. It's the world's largest species of hornet, and it is well adapted to the conditions of the Pacific Northwest. And currently, Department of Agriculture has a significant effort underway to trap and eradicate these Asian giant hornets. So there's some information in your manual about how to trap and report these. I wouldn't mess with them, frankly. If I came upon them myself, I would definitely report so that they can start a trapping process. There's debate if we'll see any in Eastern Washington, but I think it's important to know, have them on your radar. You would know if you see one. And they actually go in and like cut up the bees, and they'll just totally go through
Oh,
a
it's
hive.
awful.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
I did have one quick thing. Would you please repeat the Frisky recipe for folks?
yes, 3 ounces of Friskies cat food, the fish, ocean fish, and 10 drops of fipronil. And I believe that should be in your manual too. So.
And no, you know what she just said, is actually dog flea repellent.
Well, it's not I don't know if it's in the flea one. I know it's in like the
Or
tick.
maybe
Yeah,
that's
maybe
it,
it is
but-
flea and tick. Yeah. Now, but you can, if you look, I think ant bait also has fipronil.
Oh, does
and
she? Yeah.
and you may find it'd be less expensive because some of that stuff you put on dogs and cats is pretty pricey.
It
So
is.
yeah, you can look on Amazon or other places, or just go to like Home Depot and look in the pest section and see if you just need something that's the main component is fipronil, because that's what's going to kill those wasps. So it's the 10 drops of that to 3 ounces of Friskies Ocean Fish canned
But you
cat food.
do need to protect that bait from, you need to protect birds and other animals.
Yes, other animals.
Yeah.
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 You don't just want to stick a can out there because like my cat would try to eat it, or probably the dog. So yeah, so you do need to be careful that you don't have it where other animals can get at it. So yes, so mice, believe it or not, can get into a mama mouse can get into the hive and lay their babies, and then they'll eat all the wax and the stores in there. So the best prevention is to put a restrictor on the front, like Sherry was talking about earlier. In the fall, there are actual mouse restrictors you can buy. You can use some mesh. There's lots of different things you could do, or just restrict it so the opening is not very big. Skunks, raccoons, badgers, and bears. So this top slide is showing what happened after a badger got after a hive. So, they really tore it up and got into it and ate a lot of honey and destroyed the bees, or destroyed the frames. I think this is the story I remember hearing about. The bees were recovered, but they weren't happy. So,
That's Ellen and Jack's bees?
yeah, yes,
Oh,
yes.
God, yeah.
So the picture on the lower left is showing a way to protect your hives. At least try to, do as much as you can by using a strap to strap them all together, and strap them to, you can even try to strap them to your where you have them sitting. But so even if it gets knocked over, it's not everything flying everywhere. You can at least have it as a unit, versus tearing it apart. On the right is a platform that one person built to try to deter black bears. I'm not sure exactly, because I would have thought they'd want to climb, but that's one way. If you have an area that you have bears, you do have to be careful about having honeybee hives and bears. And and sometimes you have to actually go to installing like a 7-foot tall, heavy duty electrified fence. So it's that whole thing of thinking about where you're placing your hive and what you have in your environment locally. So we have some diseases of the brood that can happen. American foul brood, that is a bacteria spore. Those spores can be infected honey that is fed to the larvae by the nurse bees. The spores can be dormant up to 70 years, so long time. The big takeaway with American foul brood is if you suspect you have it, you can take any object, twig, toothpick, pine needle, whatever, and you actually stick it in. The brood is dead, so you stick it in that brood cell and pull it out. And if there's a brownish ropish string that comes out from that, when you stick that toothpick or whatever in there, and it has a very foul odor, then you most likely have foul brood. The most common, there's no effective treatment. And the fact that it's so difficult to kill the spores, it's recommended that you burn all the woodenware and foundation if you have American foul brood. There is some information about using terramycin and sugar syrup to treat treating hives in infected areas, but my recommendation would be to, if you suspect you have this, to contact a mentor, someone experienced in a local area or club to help you make sure that you really do or do not have this. European foul brood, that is also caused by a bacteria. It will, instead of having that foul odor, have a strong odor. The larva's dead, brown, and twisted in the bottom of the cell, and there is no ropey goo. There's, you can do a spring treatment of terramycin as a preventative, but we really discourage that because that promotes resistance. So it's not recommended, and I don't think it comes up that often in this area. Best prevention is maintaining a strong, healthy hive in a sunny, dry location, good airflow. Italian bees seem more resistant to European foul brood. And then chalk brood is caused by a fungus rather than a bacteria. And the symptoms are dead larvae that turn white and then black. You may see them being cleaned out of their hive and left at the entrance of a hive. It usually clears itself up by the heat of summer in a healthy hive. And for the European foul brood and the chalk brood, one of the important things you can do is to replace those brood frames every 3 to 5 years. So if you just remember, when you buy new frames, just write a date on them, then you can, every couple of years be rotating out old ones and adding new ones. So these are the 3 diseases here. Foul brood has the ropey goo. European is the sour smell more than the foul smell, and then the chalk brood. Nosema happens because it's also caused by a single cell fungus, and the bee ingests the spore, and then it infects the bee. So newly emerged bees are not infected, but the bees that are already out can be affected. Once it's inside the gut, the cell grows, that fungus, and it bursts, releasing 50,000 spores. It's more pronounced in the northern climates because we have reduced flying time outside of the hives for our bees during the, late fall, winter, early spring. You'll see the poop here on the inside of the hive and the outside. Bees don't normally go to the bathroom inside of the hive, so if they are, there's probably something going on with them. We usually see it in spring in our area, and usually, there are some essential oils that can be used, but usually you don't need to do any treatment, and preventative treatments aren't actually recommended. Again, if you have a strong hive, it warms up, there's good ventilation, they're gonna get better. And then the last slide we have is not necessarily a pest, but another thing that can happen to your hive is that it can be poisoned. So this is a classic case of poisoning where there's a pile of bees. Almost all the bees are dead in a big mound outside of the hive. The takeaway on this is, of course, people who have honeybee hives are careful about poison, and we don't put it on things, but you can't always control everybody, and so let your neighbors know that you have hives. Let them know where your hives are located. If they like to spray things, weeds, etc., try to educate them and ask them to not spray when the bees are flying or on days where the wind will carry the spray toward your hives. Be careful. Maybe take that into consideration when you place your hive. Some people let the county know so they won't spray the weeds along their roadway area. So it's as much a matter of just communicating. And that is the end of this slide presentation. So any other questions?
Well, I just wanted to say my best wasp trap is a kiddie pool. You fill it up with water and put some dish soap in it. The bees don't get in there very rarely, some do, but the wasps, when they land on it with the surfactant, they can't fly away. I've had where I take the strainer a couple times a day. And then, you know, the dog licks it, oh well. So that's the best one.
Yeah. Like I said, there's lots of different mixtures and, you know, and I would say for the apple juice and water, I do add some soap to it so that they can't get out of that when you're trapping them. So any other questions, comments?
I don't have any on here, sorry. Are we there? Are we good?
I think we're done.
I think we're
Okay.
done.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the comments and such. Yeah, bleaching your tools and gloves if you
Mhm.
do have exposure to one of those diseases. Yes, very good to know. And just in
think-
general, keeping your stuff clean.
I think they don't recommend that you burn plastic. So
That is true.
And I believe if you do have American foul brood check, I would have to check the Washington state regulations again, but I think with the plastic frames and such, you double wrap them in plastic and take them to the hazardous waste dump.
Yes, it did say in the book that
Yeah.
you can take them to the
Mhm.
waste center. Yeah.
You just want them off your place and away from your bees.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they need to bury them or something.
Yeah, you have to get, so I haven't heard of it too often here in this area. Have you?
I have known some folks in our organ and the association who have had troubles with it. It came in on package. And
Okay.
so it's not actually, they consider, I think especially American foul brood and European, I'm not sure about European foul brood, to be pretty ubiquitous. It's just whether it erupts into a problem. In other words, you find it in almost all bees, but whether it develops into a problem is another matter.
Mm.
And I
Oh,
don't quote me on that, but I think it's pretty common to find evidence of it, at least in a hive. But anyway, it's not one you want. American foul brood is not one you want.
No.
You can do things for European and a lot of the other things, but not that.
And the fact that the spores last for so many years,
Yes.
that's why you don't want to keep your equipment because
Mhm.
you'll just keep spreading it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, see everybody this coming Saturday